They invited in a ton of international journalists, and they showed them footage, basically footage that they'd recovered. If you fire to a house in a kibbutz, 5, a beheaded Israeli soldier. There can be a Palestinian state that gets
A war of words between the United Nations and Israel is escalating, with the Israeli ambassador calling for the resignation of Secretary General Antonio Guterres after a speech on Tuesday. Guterres spoke to the media earlier, saying that he wished to set the record straight, and he criticized those who claimed he had justified attacks by Hamas.
I am shocked by the misrepresentations by some of my statement yesterday in the Security Council, as if I was justifying acts of terror by Hamas. This is false. It was the opposite.
Kristen Salumi is at the United Nations in New York. Can you tell us where this is coming from and why Guterres feels the need to set the record straight, in his words?
Right. Well, yesterday, during the Security Council meeting on the situation in the Middle East, Guterres, in his remarks, did, as you just heard, talk about the situation in the Middle East. He said in those remarks that what is happening in Gaza didn't happen in a vacuum, or sorry, what Hamas did and what is happening in the Middle East didn't happen in a vacuum, that the Palestinians have been subjected to 56 years of occupation. That prompted a very, very angry response from the Israeli delegation. Foreign Minister Eli Cohen canceled his visit with the Secretary General that was scheduled for later in the day. The Israeli ambassador said that the Secretary General should resign and that Israel was going to cancel visas for diplomats, including Martin Griffiths, the chief humanitarian undersecretary general here at the United Nations, who is in the region. He's been in Egypt and was scheduled to go to Israel. They're saying they're not going to give him a visa to come to the country because of these remarks, which they said seemed to justify Hamas's terror attacks, which, as you just heard, the Secretary General vehemently denied. And I can tell you, I was in here listening to his remarks. He did very much condemn the taking of civilians, the attacks on civilians, and so forth. But it was those remarks that prompted this angry reaction from the Israeli delegations. I should also point out that the UN hasn't confirmed whether or not Martin Griffiths is still planning to travel, if the visa has in fact been canceled, or where things stand. But that was the threat that was made by the Israeli team.
Kristen, this is a remarkable what's been happening between the UN Secretary General and Israel over the last 24 hours. Thank you very much for that reporting. We're going to go to Alan Fisher, who is joining us now from occupied East Jerusalem for the Israeli side of this. Alan, I suppose the question is, number one, explain Israel's reaction to what Guterres said and what they're doing now. Alan, can you hear me? All right, it looks like we're going to work on the audio on that and bring Alan Fisher in with us just momentarily. We definitely need the other side of the other side of this story, the Israeli side. I want to bring in Sultan Barakat. You're a professor of public policy at Hamad bin Khalifa University. The speech we heard from the UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres about an hour ago now. It was a 2-minute speech, and he felt the need to set the record straight. He said, "No, I'm not justifying terrorism. That is absolutely not what I'm doing." Have you ever seen a UN Secretary General do anything like that, or have to do anything like that?
Well, UN Secretary Generals are very experienced diplomats, and they have to weigh their words very, very carefully. And I think Guterres in particular is very, very knowledgeable. And, you know, he's as old as the State of Israel. And this man, before taking over as the Secretary General in 2016, he served almost for 10 years as the head of the United Nations Refugee Agency. So I understand the meaning of his words, the suffering that people go through and so on. And before that, as you know, he was Prime Minister of Portugal for a number of years. So he's not a lightweight politician who doesn't know what he's saying. He's saying it because not only him, he believes it, but he speaks on behalf of an organization. The United Nations has more rapporteurs working on Palestine than anywhere else in the world. He must have a piece of paper on his desk related to Palestine, I would suspect, every single day. So he knows what is going on. So when he says, we have to place this into context and not rush into pretending as if things have happened on the 7th of
again, that's
October.
where this all started, is because yesterday his speech at the UN, at the United Nations, he said the Hamas attacks did not happen in a vacuum. That's the quote that really sparked Israel's anger.
Well, what it did to me, I think it highlighted the bullying nature of the State of Israel. You know, it's this, the State Secretary or the Foreign Secretary for Israel reacted almost immediately in that meeting and called for his resignation. Only Israel can afford to do this. No other state before has been able to call for the resignation of the Secretary General in this immediate way. Now the call for withdrawing visas, etc. This is going back to the days of al-Bashir in Sudan. You know, this is very, very authoritarian regimes' actions towards the United Nations. Of course, Israel.
But what's the play for Israel here? Because if you start talking about not granting visas to UN high diplomats, if you start saying that the UN Secretary General, you're accusing them of justifying terrorism, etc., are they trying to discredit the UN? Because at the same time, in parallel to this, we're seeing the UN trying to come up with common language that would perhaps call for a pause in Israel's bombardment of Gaza, and presumably Israel wants none of that.
No. Of course, discrediting the UN is at the center of this strategy, I think, at this moment, because the only thing that protects the Palestinians' right today is the legal side. On the ground, they're occupied, the Israelis are expanding, the settlements are expanding, they're winning, they're taking everything. The only thing that's standing between them and creating a Jewish-only state in Palestine is the legality or the legal resolutions that have been passed by the UN. And Israel is not new to this. They've been trying to discredit the UN for a long, long time, and they will continue. One important point to note is the UN does not designate Hamas as a terrorist organization. The US does, the EU does, even maybe Saudi Arabia does, but not the United Nations. So as far as he's concerned, he's not talking about a terrorist organization that has undertaken act of terror inside Israel. Nevertheless, he did refer to the terrorizing effect of the attack Hamas undertook into Israel. So it's quite complex, and I think this is the last or the most important issue that Israel wants to attack now is the legality of the situation. They hope that as a result of this war, there will be new nations gathering, talks about a new reality, and a move away from the status quo that exists at the moment, using again the UN corridors, but based on their choice and their own arrangement.
Sultan Barakat, thank you very much for that. I want to go back now to Alan Fisher. Alan is in occupied East Jerusalem. So following the row with the UN, there's a diplomatic row between Turkey and Israel. Alan, tell us more about that one.
Well, the relations between Turkey and Israel were getting better, but they've been fraught since around 2010 when a flotilla of ships tried to break the blockade around Gaza and a number of Turkish citizens were killed. As I say, things were getting better, but then just in the last few hours, Erdogan from Turkey, the Turkish president, said that Hamas was not a terrorist organization, that it's fighting for its land, and there had been plans for him to visit Israel. He said now there will be no visit, and Israel took advantage of Turkey's good intentions. Well, there's been a response from the Israeli Foreign Ministry from that in the last couple of hours. They have said that they reject what Tayyip Erdogan has said, described Hamas as a despicable terrorist organization. And he said Turkish attempts to pretend do not change the horrors that the world has seen. Just as those relations were getting better, it seems that they are now holed below the waterline, and things between Ankara and the government in Israel are at perhaps the lowest point they've been since that event way back in 2010.
Alan Fisher reporting there from occupied East Jerusalem. Thank you very much.
Good morning, everyone. Let's take a look at some updates as it relates to the ongoing war between Israel and Hamas. I'm recording this at 8:30 a.m. Central Time on Wednesday, October 25th, 2023. Israel says that over the past 24 hours, they've carried out 400 additional strikes, mostly over Gaza, although there were some in Lebanon and Syria as well. More on that later. During those strikes, Israel says that they're able to eliminate at least 4 Hamas leaders. Included are Abd al-Rahman, a deputy commander of the Nusrat Battalion, Khalil Mahaj, deputy commander of the Shati Battalion, Khalil Tatari, deputy commander of the Sheikh Radwan Battalion, and Taisir Mubashar, the commander of North Khan Yunis Sector Battalion. Shifting over to the Palestinian casualties, the most recent information that I've seen out of the Gaza Health Ministry, which again, that information is at the very least vetted, if not entirely provided by Hamas. They say that 5,795 Palestinians have been killed during the air war over Gaza, which they say includes 2,360 children, 1,292 women, and 295 elderly. They added that more than 18,000 now have been wounded, and 1,500 are missing under the rubble. They've started to include that last number, those missing under the rubble, for a few days now. And I was kind of surprised we weren't seeing that early on. I just assumed that they were rolling that into the expected killed or the wounded. But if you look at some of the pictures coming out of Gaza right now, there's rubble everywhere. So it's not crazy to imagine that the number buried, whether they're alive or yet to be determined as dead, that number's got to be pretty significant. Now, yesterday, reports started to come out that Telegram had blocked the official Hamas channels on Android devices. I had the same issue on iOS, couldn't access any of those on my phone. They are still available on desktop, for what it's worth. I don't generally like those decisions. I understand the desire to not want to be complicit in spreading terrorist propaganda, but I think there's a lot of value in being able to go directly to the source and seeing, in this case, what is Hamas saying about these specific events, rather than waiting for it to be kind of filtered through various news agencies. But again, because it's available on desktop, that's where we're going to go. And yesterday, Hamas put out that a force of frogmen affiliated with the Al-Qassam brigades were able to infiltrate by sea and land on the beaches south of Ashkelon. They added that armed clashes are taking place with the occupation army in the area, and Israel released some of the wounded